This episode is brought to you by Hill's Pet Nutrition. Every shelter pet deserves a second chance, and you're making it possible for thousands of them every day. Because when you feed your pet Hill's, you help feed a shelter pet, which helps make them healthy, happy, and more adoptable, changing their life forever. So they can change yours. Over 15 million shelter pets fed and adopted. Science did that. Visit hillspet.com/podcast to learn more.
Today on CityCast Portland, we're talking about some of the biggest deficits we've seen in city and county budgets in decades, the challenges the new Multnomah County Board of Commissioners will be facing this year, and the Providence Hospital labor disputes that could affect the care of thousands of patients statewide. Joining me on this week's Friday News Roundup are Willamette Week City Hall reporter Sophie Peel and our very own executive producer, John Notarianni. It's Friday, January 10th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Welcome, everyone, to the Friday News Roundup. Sophie, John, thanks for hanging out with me this morning.
Hey, Claudia.
Hi.
I should say late afternoon. We're actually taping because of some, I don't want to point fingers, Sophie, but
it's actually because of another podcast.
Okay. What podcast are you going to be on that you couldn't tape during our regular hours?
I simply cannot say.
Are you going on Joe Rogan, Sophie?
Oh my God, is it Joe Rogan again?
Oh, I wish. That'd be cool. I don't think you'd ever invite me on.
Anyhow, we're taping this Wednesday afternoon, late afternoon. Just a heads up on that. So for those of you new to the show, today is the day we break down some of the biggest local stories of the week with some of the best and brightest journalists in town. But before we jump into the news, I usually ask an opening question so our listeners can get to know our guests a little better. And today's opening question is related to the news of one of the Northwest's most active undersea volcano, which is predicted to erupt this year. Did you guys hear about this?
I did. I saw that and I'm like, well, there's another thing to worry about that hadn't crossed my mind so far this week.
This volcano is called Axial Seamount. It's roughly 300 miles offshore and about a mile underwater, but scientists are not worried that the eruption will cause a tsunami or trigger an earthquake on land. Fingers crossed, because it's just too far from our region's fault line, which is like Cascadia. But all of this leads me to our opening question. What other potential cataclysmic events are you two predicting for our area? And I can go first if you need some time to gather your thoughts, because I think, they're both, by the way, nodding. I think 2025 is the year aliens finally made contact with Earth in a meaningful way. And I think the location they'll pick for their big debut is Portland, Oregon. And I think they've had their eye on us for a long time, have fallen in love with our dramatic natural landscapes. And also, I'm pretty sure they read up and learned that Kearns is considered one of the coolest neighborhoods in the whole entire world. And they're probably excited to check out Stark's Vacuum Museum. They've probably heard so much about it.
Are aliens a natural disaster? I don't think that counts.
It's cataclysmic.
Supernatural disaster.
Oh, sorry. Okay, you broadened it. Let me Google that word real quick. A violent natural event. Well, I guess aliens are natural. Used to emphasize the extent of something bad or unwelcome. So you don't want them here.
I don't think we do so well with aliens. No, I don't think that's going to work out. Some of the brightest minds have been like, how about they don't find us? So I'm,
I mean, in light of like both the fear of earthquakes that is very real and very scary, and all of the like horrific things that have been going on this week in terms of wildfires on the West Coast, I'm trying to think of something that would both be a disaster and be kind of cute. And I'm imagining like some sort of really intense mutation in moss where like every single surface in Portland just gets like really mossy, and like all the walls and fences and like cars and everything just gets covered in a little layer of fuzzy moss.
It sounds nice.
But I'm sure that would be like bad for like natural environments and ecosystems, but I think it'd be like nice too. So that's what I'm going for.
Wow, we'd be like living fairies.
Yeah, it'd be kind of cute.
Isn't like the plague back?
Bird
I
flu?
think whooping cough is making a comeback.
No, I thought the bubonic plague like had a resurgence.
Oh my God.
Yes. In February 2024, a resident of Deschutes County, Oregon was diagnosed with a bubonic plague.
And there's nothing cute about that.
There's nothing cute about the bubonic plague.
Oh my gosh, this is the first time going to the news is going to brighten our spirits.
See what I did? See what I did? I love John's like, this is a terrible opening question. You know what? It's only up from here. Also, John, you remind me of something. When I lived in college, we had a friend who, was like living off campus, and she had an infestation of ladybugs. And she was so delighted, upset. And it just reminded me of your moss thing. Like, she's like, they took over the kitchen and it was so awesome. I'm so scared. I have to move.
See, that's the sort of disaster I want.
And that's the kind of disaster that I was talking about, But you know what? Bubonic plague. What if it makes us really good at something else? I don't know. It's mutated, And now we can breathe underwater.
It's a great year for memoirs.
They were infected probably by a pet cat.
It's getting sadder. I'm going to move on.
Oh,
all right. Well, thank you so much, you two, for your answers. On to the news of the week. Sophie, you're looking into budget cuts looming over the city this year and what that's going to mean for us. So how bad is it?
Well, according to the city's top administrator, Michael Jordan, this is the worst budget he's seen at the city of Portland since the early 1990s. Ooh. He's been an observer of the city and in city government for many, many years. He says we haven't seen this bad of a budget in decades. So by his telling, it's pretty bad. The city earlier, or I guess late in December, had said, look, we're looking at a minimum a $27 million budget hole. So basically, our revenues as a city are not sufficient to cover expenses. But $27 million is by many accounts sort of a lowball number. There are a number of things that the city did not include in that hole that are going to make that hole at least double the size as it currently is now. Ooh. And so a couple of those things, as probably many Portlanders know, there are a number of labor unions that are currently negotiating with the city of Portland over new contracts. I think it's 8 unions in total. Of course, some are more sizable than others, but those negotiations are ongoing. As usual, what happens to labor negotiations is the unions have to make some concessions. They have to move toward the middle, and the city also has to move toward the middle. Mm-hmm. So the city is almost certainly going to end up paying more for, these new contracts than it did prior. So that's going to add another anywhere from $5 to $10 million annually to this budget hole. Healthcare benefits for city employees. Those costs are skyrocketing. So that's going to add another probably $5 to $10 million to the current city's budget hole. And we don't know what those figures are exactly yet. The insurance companies have to come back and basically tell us, here's what we're realistically looking at. And then lastly, the city council and Mayor Keith Wilson, they are asking for a pretty big hike in their council office budgets because they say they don't have enough staff to basically do the work that Portlanders want them to do. So they just asked for actually an $11.3 million package for next year.
Oh my God.
And that's above the $27 million that is already projected?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that is all. That's all above. And I haven't gotten to the biggest one. Again,
moss removal?
It's a moss removal.
I think as many people know, former Mayor Ted Wheeler, sort of during the pandemic years and really aggressively in 2022 and a little bit of 2023, he made a bunch of emergency declarations that basically allowed him to kind of create new offices, to tackle homelessness in some ways, do more camp cleanups. And he allocated a lot of the federal COVID relief dollars into those new projects. So the past 3 to 4 years, Portlanders have sort of come to see those projects as forever projects. They are just part of what they envision as city services right now. And all those dollars are now dried up. So we also, on top of the 3 things I just mentioned, we have about $40 million that we have not located yet if we want to keep those programs going. So all said and done, we have a much bigger hole than we thought.
I mean, the thing that I don't get about this, and this is the simplest question and probably doesn't have an easy answer, but why are we in this budget hole that is the worst in a generation?
Yeah.
I mean, I can see a little bit from the COVID bounce back, maybe some downtown real estate or something, but it's just staggering and I don't quite know how we got here.
Yeah. I mean, so inflation is part of it. The materials that the city buys, the contractors that the city hires, everything just costs more every single year with inflation. Meanwhile, our property tax revenues have dipped a little bit, and that is largely due to those vacant buildings in downtown. So their values have gone down. And that's affecting the county
budget as well,
It
which
is,
we'll
and
get
it's
to.
very
but
real. Yeah. And so it's it's interesting. For me, it almost feels like when everyone has said downtown doesn't need to be an office core, I feel like at like 2 years ago, it was like, ooh, let's see if we can reimagine this. Now you understand why people were so concerned about our downtown getting hollowed out. It is a problem for our city services. It is a real problem that our downtown is completely hollowed out. That wasn't just like downtown developers screaming like, oh, my building's losing money. Like, it's a real thing. Like, you need an economic center because it does affect your property tax values.
Yeah. I read that Keith Wilson's office pointed to not only, prioritizing solving the city's unsheltered homelessness, but also the city's upcoming budget constraints for walking back his return to work mandate for city employees, which I thought was funny for a few reasons. One, it really just reeked of spin because everybody was like, boo, Keith Wilson, boo, and the labor unions were like, let's go, buddy, let's try this,
Yeah.
But it appears like his idea of getting more people downtown might be more helpful than, we're maybe giving him credit for. But also, is he right? Like, is it going to cost more money? Like, more lights will be on, more electricity, more,
And that's a lot of parking fees and Einstein bagels,
Yeah, but does it balance out? Like,
Yeah.
do you think the budget was solely the reason why he decided to walk away from that potential conflict?
I think there is a very obvious answer to why he walked back from this. And I mean, he hasn't told me this, but we had written that he had backtracked on this back to work thing. In his statement, and I got a lot of feedback on his statement where people were like, what does unsheltered homelessness have anything to do with bringing employees back to work? And my answer to them was like, well, it has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, maybe I should have actually pressed him a little bit. But then, we pressed him a little bit more on it. And he clarified that we thought you were talking about priorities. Like, our priority is ending unsheltered homelessness. Bringing people back to work can wait. We can only do one thing at a time. But I think to any political observer that it is not lost on them that labor unions in this town are very powerful. They get their way in City Hall a lot. They are looking at a new city council that is quite pro-labor. And Mayor Wilson is no fool. He's looking at that too. And he realizes oh, shoot, I have got a very, very kind of strong guild of these labor unions who are going to fight me tooth and nail on this return to work policy.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Well, I mean, there was a lot of discussion last year about some programs that are still bringing in money, like the Portland Clean Energy Fund and all of the dollars that are flowing through that. And I feel like before the election, there was a lot of chatter about maybe redistributing some of those funds. Is any of that still on the table or?
Oh, I'm sure that will be a point of discussion for the city council. I mean, that is one of the obvious places to look. You have got this ginormous fund that has hundreds of millions of dollars that are available. Obviously, not necessarily for just general funds, but I think that is one of the obvious places that the city council is going to, and the mayor is going to have to look at and say, do we want to try to touch that? Because that's one of the places in the city that is actually revenue generating.
Yeah.
And they've got a lot of money and they don't always know what to do with it.
Oh, I feel so bad for them.
Yeah.
My heart goes out.
I know.
Shut up, Dawn.
I've been there too. We've all been there.
We've all been there.
I still fall on merch. I mean, I still think the city of Portland, we have a brand. Portland has a brand.
Yeah.
I think we could be selling t-shirts. That's all. For Portland and against Portland. And you know what? We get the money.
Beer koozies for bridges. That should be our new motto.
I think the city council is going to look at every single opportunity to close the budget hole instead of cutting the budget.
Yeah.
I think they will potentially consider new taxes. I don't know how much traction that will get. I can't imagine it'll get a lot, but there's 12 people right now whose gears are turning and they don't want to piss off the unions either. So, and I mean, there's really it's a binary choice right now. Either you find money to plug the budget hole or you make cuts. Those are the two options.
Congratulations. You're in charge of the city now.
You won. Yeah.
You won. Was that to every
To
counselor?
the mayor, to the council, to the whole lot of them.
This is a tough 6 months for these counselors. They really are getting a taste of what it is to be an elected official in a austere budget year. This sucks for them.
Speaking of sucks, let's take a quick break here because when we come back, I have some fun news about the county.
What's the fun news?
So my topic this week is about our almost brand new Multnomah County Board, their expected priorities, and possible interpersonal dynamics. Sophie, you asked what's so fun about the county, and I'm here to tell you absolutely nothing. That was a teaser. I was messing with your head, and I apologize, everyone.
Oh, wow, you messed with it. I'm all over the place right now.
So, by the time this hits our listeners, the county would have had their first session this week. So reporter Austin De Dios from the Oregonian published a couple of preview type articles on our new county board earlier this week, which I found really interesting because as we all know now, how well the county board works together and also with the city is crucial in how much Portland will be able to progress this year on the big three issues stacked at the very top of every city leader's plate, which are addressing our deep-rooted issues of homelessness, our region's lack of behavioral health resources, and drug addiction. And since most of these goals are service-dependent, services the county has traditionally provided, everyone just has their fingers crossed right now that this new batch of county commissioners will play nice. And that the new batch of city councilors will also play nice. Because our last county board, if you don't remember, there was a lot of infighting, fiery monologues, and personal attacks during their sessions. And it really slowed everything down, down to allocating where the millions and millions of dollars the county had to spend on homelessness would go. So the Oregonian articles that I read pointed out some of the bigger projects and issues this new board will have to manage and solve. On top of all the services they already provide are that dang drug addiction deflection center that is still very much under construction. The Burnside Bridge's rebuild, along with the businesses that it's going to displace. Getting all the companies on our Riverside fuel storage strip to prove they can front the bill to fix any spills or disasters. And that's the CEI hub our show will not shut up about. Well, mostly me. But if you're just like, what fuel strip? The CEI hub, the major changes possibly coming to Metro's homelessness tax, which would greatly affect how much money the county receives. And I think also what new housing projects that they have a say over, because speculation here, this is speculation time. It appears that Metro might be growing frustrated that our county's inability to create and retain affordable housing at the rate that it is needed. And finally, the county board is also facing a budget shortfall, due in large part to, as Sophie was stating, plummeting property values in Portland's downtown, meaning less income from property taxes. And this budget shortfall is the first in several years. And it's forecasted to be a $21 million deficit in their general fund. I'm not 100% sure what departments or programs that would mean cuts for, but Jessica Vega Peterson, the county chair, has already asked departments to submit reduction packages that could outline potential cuts ranging from 8 to 12% in funding. Before I go a little deeper on what I've laid out, what are you guys thinking?
I mean, they really just laid out the list of the most intractable, challenging issues that our region faces. They are not giving themselves any easy marks with that list. There is no it's just an impossibly difficult list of things. And yeah, they got their work cut out for them.
I feel like they should start thinking about delegating. I'm not even joking. Because I'm like, do they have the infrastructure to deal with all this? Even just the building of that bridge, ultimately, the board is the head of the project management in a sense,
To me, that sounds like that could be the ultimate nightmare. I think that replacing and rebuilding a piece of infrastructure like that could make dealing with some of these other issues look like a cakewalk. That could get really, really gnarly if it gets mismanaged. I mean, and, look across the country, whether it's California high-speed rail or the Big Dig in Boston, there's been no shortage of infrastructure projects that have turned into ballooning nightmares for municipalities.
Should that just go to Metro then? Do you know what I'm saying? Should some of this stuff not be county managed.
Well, I don't think Metro's the right place for it either. I mean, I think that I think the ideal thing would be to sort of blow up this crazy system of some responsibilities for works and projects here and some there, and actually make a streamlined regional government. But I don't think that's going to happen in 2025.
Yeah. Well, Metro's supposed to be that answer. But yeah. What about you, Sophie?
I think I am just I'm so interested in maybe for better or for worse, the personalities on the county commission and how it's going to change the dynamic. I mean, you alluded to just how fractured the last county commission was. And honestly, that was not the only county commission that was there was a worse one 5-10 years ago. It's not even the worst it was. And we thought it was really bad at the time. And it was. And it did mean that very little got done. And the chair had so much power to choose the agenda, but she had some really harsh critics on the commission, and Sharon Myron, her and JVP were just constantly at each other's throats. And it was nasty. It was really nasty. Not to even mention then the county's relationship with the city, which also historically has been fractured as well. So I'm really curious to see how much interaction there is between the county and the city, especially. I mean, I know we always come back to this, but genuinely, biggest issue for Portlanders right now is public safety and homelessness. I mean, that's what all the surveys would suggest is is top of mind for Portlanders. And the county and city, by all measures, it feels like they've done so little to address that problem. And they've always been at odds in some ways for how to address that problem. And I feel like there's been a lot of noise in the past year and a half of the former city council saying, we're on board with the county. We feel like we're going in the right direction, blah, blah, blah. But it's hard to measure success. I don't know how to measure success. I don't think the county knows how to measure success. I don't know if the city knows how to measure success. But I don't know. I'm just, and this is so in the weeds, but I'm just so fascinated by how the relationships will develop.
Yeah. And ideally with that, a streamlining of accountability, because I think the main feature of the last commission was finger pointing between the commission and the city. If we're talking about outcomes, that is the least effective thing imaginable.
Correct. I'm correct, John. I don't know why I said that. A plus. To what you've said, Sophie, and to your point, John, the part that I was I wanted to share this was because these new commissioners have come in. Is it 3 out of the 4 are absolutely new? And they are coming in with such optimism, such hope, and also zero baggage for each other. I feel like the last one had so much baggage because one of them ran for chair, didn't get it, and was very upset at the leadership and who got it. This new board is coming in absolutely fresh, in a sense. And there's a lot of hope.
I think the refresh at all levels of government has sort of swept some energy and new ideas into the room. We'll see how long it takes for that to go stale. I don't know how long it takes.
John.
I mean, yeah,
Wow, John.
But the moss, we'll have moss covering everything, and it'll be cute, even as we go back into municipal gridlock.
But I mean, just the background of everybody on the board, everyone seems very service motivated. We have social workers, we have labor advocates. I think that we have a good mix of people. So we're going to keep an eye on it. And, good luck to everyone on the county commission board because we're still rooting for you. But let's take another break here. And when we return, more headlines of the week. All right, John. So what's your headline this week?
My headline this week is just a little bit of news about potentially the largest healthcare strike in Oregon history that is potentially underway at this very moment. So we are recording on Wednesday night, but by the time this gets to all of you listeners on Friday, it is very likely that there's going to be 5,000 nurses and doctors and frontline healthcare workers that are on strike, both in Portland and across the state. Leaning on a lot of great reporting from Amelia Templeton at OPB and Christine De Leon at The Oregonian on this. Providence, they've been fighting for a contract with their nurses and their doctors. At the end of the year, there was still nothing. So January 10th, this huge strike is potentially happening. It's about 20% of Providence's workforce, both in Portland and across the state. 8 different hospitals, 6 women's clinics. And unlike previous strikes that have happened, this one's open-ended. There isn't a planned end on when this is going to wrap up.
Sophie, have you been following this at all? I know that's not really your beat, but I'm curious.
I've been reading about it, but I haven't been covering it myself. But I feel like everything healthcare related right now, it's just like this industry is so rife with labor issues, and consumers are always really unhappy with like whether it's hospitals or healthcare companies or insurance companies. And this just feels like such a controversial world, especially when it comes to like private healthcare companies. I think we don't know what we don't know. And I think there's so much suspicion around these like huge institutions, these huge money-making institutions who also are saying like they're broke, that like I don't understand this world. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is that there's just a lot of issues that are sort of woven around each other right now, right? Like what they're saying is questions about sort of pay and pay equity, of course, but a lot of it is about staffing. And a lot of it is about just like not having caps on the number of people that can be admitted into these hospitals, and of just, working conditions for these people that are still on the sort of long edge of burnout from the pandemic. And I think that the pandemic really unveiled a lot of systemic issues in like the healthcare system and like hospital systems as a whole that nobody has resolved yet. So these sorts of like labor conflicts keep coming to a head.
Yeah. Ultimately, whenever I think of these strikes, healthcare providers or even teachers, I always think that it's the care and the services. Like, even though this is about nurses, to me, I see it as a benefit for patient care. Same thing with like teachers. I think of students, and because they're fighting for the quality of service that they are providing, And like I saw a few social media posts from doctors at Providence pointing to this OPB article published last week as another reason why they're headed to a strike. And of course, no diss to the excellent reporting at OPB, because they definitely provided a voice to the workers who were refuting the hospital's official response. But some doctors and nurses in these social media updates specifically called out the hospital for reaching out to media outlets like OPB, creating a narrative that it was nurses and doctors not willing to negotiate. And it was also felt that the hospital's tactic of appealing to the doctors, like, I don't know if you saw some of the headlines.
This is a really interesting wrinkle in this, but go on, yeah.
Yeah. Being like, hey, I get if the nurses have to work, but doctors, you are irreplaceable. Which already, that language, like, we can't hire scabs for you.
Yeah.
So it would be for the good of all public if you could stay while we're attempting to negotiate with the nurses, which was meant to create a rift between the nurses and the doctors.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. So this is the first time that like physicians and advanced clinical providers, aka doctors, are striking alongside nurses as well. It's clear that the way that the different groups representing the different staffers, the way those negotiations went was not the same.
Yeah. And so what I was saying was basically these posts by the people actually on the ground, the doctors and the nurses, are just like, hey, man, they're trying to make themselves look like a caring institution. But I just want you to know that this is what we're dealing with. Like, there's a Dr. Jennifer Lincoln, who is an OBGYN at a Providence hospital and now has like 2.8 million followers on TikTok, giving daily updates on what's happening through the lens of the workers. We can link to her TikTok profile if you're curious, what she's saying. It's been cool hearing someone, on the ground. She'll post updates on what's happening, like relating to the possible strike. Like this Wednesday, Providence paid for an ad in the Oregonian that has a clickable link to the public explaining how patient cares are their top priority, which further incensed nurses and doctors. Like, they just really upset. This all appears to have snowballed because it took Providence nearly 9 months to get the proper signage up in their break rooms detailing workers' rights via their union, which included wages, staffing, and subcontracting. And I feel like that is very much about patient care.
I think it's really interesting. Like, I promise this will loop back to what we're talking about, but I don't know if you guys have been keeping up with the whole like Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni lawsuit thing about how like Justin Baldoni, right, like hired this whole PR firm.
I'm so glad we're finally talking about this.
I know.
Go on, Sophie.
It's a culture podcast now.
Yeah.
No, I've been fascinated with this whole thing, similar to like the Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing, where these men, and I know it's a little different, but like had hired these PR firms to basically like go to the quote unquote media. Of course, it's, it's not like reputable organizations, but do a whole social media campaign that it sort of subtly attacked these women. They hired PR crisis firms to like plant poor stories. And like, I know this is sort of a obviously a very different version of it, but it's the same thing. I would be so curious, not that we'll ever know this, but how much money Providence has spent on like marketing, or basically trying to create that rift. But like, it's a whole thing. It's all a game, right? And it's a game. It's a game. Both sides are playing the game, but like this stuff gets nasty.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I will say that the Oregon Nurses Association, which is representing the nurses, is not pulling any punches. They put out a open call to elected leaders in Oregon, basically to force Providence back to the bargaining table or to like cancel their federal funding. They've also like filed grievances about like improper labor negotiations. So there's a lot of firepower at play here.
Yeah. Didn't Representative Maxine Dexter, she made a public statement like, I stand with the nurses.
Yeah. New 3rd Congressional District representative, she sent out a press release this week saying that, I mean, she's a healthcare provider. And she says, as a healthcare provider, I stand with the doctors and nurses at Providence.
Oh, man.
We will see.
Well, John, thanks for digging that up.
Nothing but sunshine, right?
Nothing but sunshine here. If you're a new listener, just want you to know this has been one of our happiest episodes, so it just gets worse from here. I'm just joking.
This was bleak.
This was bleak. You know what? I really feel like I set the tone.
You did.
With that opening question.
With how do you want to die as an opening question?
Look, listen, I didn't say we were all going to die. I said a fun cataclysmic event, that seems awful, but then it's like, hey, it's not that bad. Like the largest underwater volcano is going to erupt, but guess what? We're going to be fine.
Yeah.
When you were talking about that underwater volcano, like I imagined something big, and then I realized as the story was going on that like it actually like nothing's going to happen. And I was just imagining like seeing the ocean?
Yeah. The ocean. Yeah.
Right, that's just making sure it's what body of water we're talking about. Just like knowing that a volcano erupted and there's just like a little blip, like just a little wave.
Exactly. Julia Fiaioni has decided that our next opening question will be, what bridge would you jump off of? And I think
and why?
And I think that's a really good idea. So
tune in next week to CityCast Portland.
The one from which I would most swiftly die, or like the one where I wouldn't die?
Okay, so we're not
up to you. Sophie,
yeah.
Up to you.
I'll think about it.
Next time you're on, that will be the opening question. So you have plenty of time to think about it.
From which bridge would you most likely yeet yourself off of?
And why?
And why?
Currently, why?
Yeah. What is the driving force?
Well, you guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate you hanging out with me.
Thank you, guys.
All right, thanks, Claudia.
Bye. Our podcast production team this week was John Notarianni, Julia Fiaioni, and Lizzie Goldsmith. Our Hey Portland newsletter editors were Adrian Gonzalez and Rachel Monahan. Our host is me, Claudia Meza. Original music by Jenny Conley and Steven Drizos. Additional music by Epidemic Sound and All the Kimonos. We'll be back Monday morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.